Greetings, everyone. StephenGray here. You are either watching the StephenGray YouTube channel or listening to this on Anchor.fm. This is a series of interviews I'm doing with leading figures in particularly this work with psychedelics, but also the overarching view of consciousness transformation and the hope that this planet can get its feet going in the right direction for the future generations. So I've been interviewing, as I say, some amazing people, and this person today is a continuation of that. While it's on my mind, I also want to mention, in case I forget at the end, that our guest, well, whose name I will have to mention now, Zoe Helene, will be one of the featured speakers at this year's Spirit Plant Medicine Conference. This is our 10th year, but for the first time this year, we're having to do it online for obvious reasons that everyone will know. But that's also opened up exciting possibilities. And one of the things that Zoe and I were talking about just before this is that we are being able to bring people from very far-flung locations, so we probably wouldn't have been able to, logistically speaking. So we are hoping that this reaches around the world and that as many people as possible will come and be part of this vision, because that's what it is. It's a prayer and a vision for the world. As perhaps a slight enticement, my co-organizing partner Mark has asked me to mention a discount code. If you are watching this, you will see this code and you are welcome to share it with friends. Maybe everyone will get a discount, I don't know. Here's the discount code, and I'll put it on the screen too for those who are watching this. It's VSPMC 2020. So that's Virtual Spirit Plant Medicine Conference 2020. And that will get you an 11% discount on one of the 3 levels of ticket prices. So that's where you'll find out all the information. So enough yakking about that for the moment. Now I'm going to read a short bio of Zoe Helene. I have to get used to that because I've always called her Zoe Helene before. Anyway, Zoe Helene founded the environmental feminism collective Cosmic Sister in 2007 to advocate for women, wilderness, and wildlife, and for our natural right to work with nature's psychedelic medicines, our co-evolutionary allies. She believes a true balance of power across the gender spectrum globally is the only way humans and non-humans will survive. Zoe coined the term psychedelic feminism to describe a subgenre of feminism that embraces intentional work with sacred psychedelic plants and fungi, such as ayahuasca, peyote, iboga, psilocybin mushrooms, and cannabis, while encouraging women to explore the wilderness within, in part to revisit core feminist issues in fresh and exciting ways. I don't know how to pronounce this word. Zoe, you can correct me later. In her TEMENO talking circles, Zoe welcomes all respectful, open-hearted truth seekers who wish to explore the damaging effects of late-stage patriarchy, including the wounds, harmful social conditioning, and emotional burdens we each carry from an abusive culture. Her loving, hopeful methods for evoking intentions in preparation for medicine work follow a character is action approach to improving relationship dynamics with ourselves, each other, and all living beings. And I also want to point out, if I haven't made it somewhat clear already in my initial words, that Zoe and I are colleagues and friends, and that not only is she a speaker for the second consecutive year at the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference, she, through Cosmic Sister, has provided, I guess you could say, or at least turned me on to almost all of the women who are performing at this year's conference, for speaking, I mean, it's not really performing. So anyway, welcome, Zoe. Thanks a lot for doing this.
Thank you. It's so interesting to hear your bio read out loud. Like, oh, that's it. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's right. They say just don't take your publicity too seriously and you're good.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I'm trying to get at least some of the core concepts into that so that it's out there when people are ready to listen, and that way
Mm-hmm.
they know what they're going to get.
Hmm.
at least the basics. And TEMENO is correct, by the way.
Okay. Oh, good. Yeah. So, really, you hardly need help from me, to be honest. I'm just going to start by asking you to talk a little bit more about why you started psychedelic. Actually, let's go back a little. We have an hour.
Yeah,
Maybe you could talk a little bit about how you got into this work altogether, or a little bit about your, you might call spiritual history, shall we say? Can we say that?
spiritual
Yeah.
history.
Yeah.
Geez, where do you start with that?
Anywhere. Yeah, that's the same feeling I have when people interview me.
Yeah, I mean, some of us, I think, if we landed here, we probably were spiritual from the get-go.
Ooh,
I
good one.
certainly came into this world that way, and
Mm.
they called me an artist because that's what you usually called people of that nature. And now, if I'd been in another family, in another situation, they might have called me something else. I have a close Maori friend in New Zealand who they picked her as the seer. As they always pick the child. So they picked that little girl out of many and said, that is the seer of this generation. For me, I was born and raised in a world of professional performing and visual artists and scientists also. And they saw art. They saw you have the soul of the artist. So, okay, fine, I'll be an artist. But, if you really think about it, that's very similar. I think a lot of, I talk to Chris about this a lot. I think ethnobotany, for example, is also very much an art.
Chris is your
So,
husband. Chris Killam we're talking about here.
thank you. Yes,
Yeah.
Chris. I've seen this in him. I've seen this in other ethnobotanists that I've had a lot of good contact with. I think there is an artistry to this. It's where your own very personal view of the world is expressed in your work. And I mean, I think probably we're all artists to a point if you're free enough to be. But that I happen to be born into a place where people really recognized in me this truly otherworldly little girl. And I also immediately loved animals and wildlife. We lived in the middle of a woods, and my father worked at a performing arts school in North Carolina, and we lived outside of Winston-Salem where that was. It's called the North Carolina School of the Arts, and back then it was a really exciting time, like 60, well, I was born in 64 and we left for New Zealand in 1974. So those were the 10 years we were part of the School of the Arts, and it was
Hmm.
brand new at the time and part of the counterculture revolution. So I had a really exciting and interesting early years in that little house in the middle of the woods. And just down from where we lived was a creek that there was actually a series of creeks that would then lead into streams that would lead into a lake. And for some reason, my parents they trusted me very, very young. I mean, young enough to be not hardly talking yet, to just wander about and explore. So I really found the forest to be my friend, and I was alone a lot in that forest looking for critters and just checking it out. And it's funny because when we moved to New Zealand, I turned 10 the year we moved. We ended up in a place where there was primary rainforest in our backyard. It was part of our property, and it also was part of many other people's property to the side. So they were all farmers, but they also had pieces of primary rainforest left. And I spent a lot of time in that forest, and it was very, very different. But I'm kind of going around, but I say this because the forest and the jungle is very, very much a part of my spiritual nature. It
Mm.
seems like that's where I go to find myself. Better if there's water as well. In New Zealand, it was salt water. In the United States, it was fresh water, but it was still water. And critters, whatever the critters are, they're all there. They're all part of the forest. Like the forest is not just trees, it's everything. And I mean, when I say hours, I mean hours. I'm amazed that my mother let us go out that long and just sort of
Mm.
say, come home in time for dinner, before the sun goes down. Because
Mm.
sometimes we would get out, sometimes it was with my little sister, we would get up early in the morning and go for a hike. And our object was to get lost. We wanted to see if we could actually get lost, and we always could
Yeah.
find our way home. But
It's a,
we sometimes were away the whole day.
it's
Just
kind of a sad fact that many fewer people feel comfortable allowing their children to do that these days. It's just
true.
we don't want to go this direction in our conversation, but it's a
True.
it's a teaching on how fear affects people because
Yes.
the level of crime that would affect those people in suburbs and so on is much lower than it was 30, 40 years ago. But People let their
It's
kids
true.
wander. Anyway, so yeah, but you know, we could do this for quite a while, catching up to the present. But can maybe you get into how you got involved with psychedelic medicines and how that
Yes.
influenced your life?
Yes, I mean, I want to go back to the early days because my father
Uh-huh.
was very anti-drugs.
Mm-hmm.
He thought we didn't need them. He was afraid that it could hurt you. He saw students have bad experiences, but many also had great experience. You understand his students were, they were teenagers in early 20s, so they were exploring psychedelics in a big way. It was everywhere around me. It just wasn't really for me because I was a kid, but I knew it was there. But my attitude was, I'm psychedelic enough, which I was. A
Hmm.
kid is psychedelic by nature, I think, and because I was encouraged to be creative and be imaginative, that was really my realm. I mean, I was in and
Hmm.
out of, I was in the other realm as much, at least, as this realm, whatever the difference really is, either as an artist or out there in the forest or in dreamland. Dreams were always very, very important to me. I've always had really strong, vivid dreams. But in terms of exploring actual, substances, mind altering or mood altering substances, it wasn't until 21 I felt that I was perfectly fine without them. I had many friends try to get me to try something because they wanted to see me do art with that. And my art was naturally very psychedelic, as a matter of fact. So I felt like I'm already there. I don't really, need that. But I also had PTSD that I had gotten when I was 18.
Hmm.
And that made me afraid to go into that sort of realm of losing control. I was afraid my PTSD came from an experience that was very, very difficult, that I witnessed somebody have what they used to call manic depression, but now they call bipolar disorder. But it was an extreme high that lasted about 6 months. We were together during that 6 months, and then there was a crash that came that brought him down into a place where he was pretty much a zombie.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
don't know how else to say it. I could lead him around by his hand to get him home when they put him right into the hospital, but he ended up in fetal position in the bed with me. And
Yeah.
I just had to deal. But what I didn't realize, and what nobody realized, is that that gave me PTSD. I was so terrified that that could happen to me or to someone else I loved, because he
Hmm.
never really fully recovered.
Hmm.
And I left New Zealand on the advice of his psychiatrist, who said, you're not married, just move on. And I spent all the money that I'd saved up to get to the United States. And I decided I wanted to live close to my grandparents on both sides. So I ended up back in North Carolina. I could have gone anywhere. I just wanted to know them. I wanted to know my elders. And before they died, I hadn't seen them for 10 years, in almost 10 years in New Zealand. And I came back when I was 19, almost exactly, turned 19 in Greece. They took me there on my sort of pilgrimage home. And I'd like to get to that because I've been talking a lot about that with Chris, about what that meant to me at 19 and how I felt about Greece and the village and all of that. It's part of my ancestral healing. And that's very much a part of a lot of people's work in the medicine space. But so I was afraid to indulge in psychedelics, in part because I really didn't trust myself. And I did, however, get to a point with cannabis where I had a college sweetheart for almost 5 years in undergrad school, who was out of school already. He was about 5 years older than me. And he was, I mean, those days you called him a pothead, okay? He was a full-on pothead, and he's a really sweet, creative guy, okay? But he pretty much got up, bong hit, get
Wake
ready
and
to go to
bake.
bed, bong hit, bong
Wake and
hit throughout the days. Basically he was all about staying stoned.
yeah, common. Yeah, wake
Yeah.
and bake.
Yeah, basically. But I think
Yeah,
his reasonings were very different from where I came from. I think he was hiding from things that were very, very difficult for him. And
very
hindsight's
common.
2020. I mean, I would think very differently about him now that I know about ayahuasca and other psychedelics and how you can work through traumas of your own. But he was carrying a trauma, and I did not know at the time what it was, but I could tell there was something, and it kept him back. And I think he didn't work with cannabis. He used cannabis, I think, as a way to escape. and to push down the pain. And I didn't understand, because you have to understand, this was the 80s. It was the classic Reagan years, which was just horrifying. And I had thought I'd have a great, wild college experience like the kids did that my father taught in the 60s and early 70s. And I hit the 80s. It's one of the most tacky eras of the entire last century.
They called it the me decade.
Oh, it was. Me. Yeah, it was. And cocaine was really the medicine of that era. And I was not at all interested in that. I had a very close girlfriend who had a personality change. And I was so concerned from her that I asked this boyfriend, and he said, describe it to me. And I described it exactly to him, very innocently. And he said, she's getting cocaine from the guy she's dating. That's a cocaine attitude. And I was like, no way. And I, again, very innocently confronted her. And she says, you're right. I'm going to stop. And she did. And she, within a week, was herself again. But I witnessed that. I thought, that's not good. That's not a good use of a drug. Okay. I'd never thought of these things as plants. That was really out of my jurisdiction. It was not the way I viewed the world. I mean, if you'd asked me, I'd say it was a plant, but it was weed. It wasn't this wonderful, glorious thing that we talk about now. So finally, after about a year of living with him, his name is Kevin. Kevin, you know, yeah, I hope he watches. He's a sweetheart, really darling person. Okay.
Good.
So, I mean, I've mentioned him plenty of times because he really is the reason I tried cannabis. And I got to give him credit for that. And it was probably extremely good weed. North Carolina weed, it's not legal, but it's good. So I finally, what happened was we lived in a duplex, and the other neighbors were really cool people, very together. They were not in college. So my college friends were elsewhere. They were, you know, in dorms and whatever. And I just noticed that, in fact, the people who indulged in this, you know, bad drug were people I really liked. And they weren't what I was being told they were supposed to be, like dropouts and, you know, completely, you know, deadening their senses. And it was like not at all who they were. And they invited us to a party downstairs, and it was a beautiful day, perfect weather, sunshine. And I said, let's try. I'd like to try. I'm ready. And so he got me his bong hit. And I'd watched him do this for years, at least a year, if not more. So I knew how to do it, but I didn't realize that if I did it the way he did it, it would be a mega, mega hit for me. So I, you know, this like major, hold it in, let it out, nothing for a while. And then it was like, I never made it to the party. I just said, Kevin, you know what? I'm cool. Just go on down yourself. I'm just going to lay here on the bed, on my back, and I'm just going to meditate. You know, and I didn't call it meditating at the time, but I was an acting student at that point. So I had all these wonderful techniques that I was learning. Method acting teaches all kinds of cool things like meditation and memory recall. And that does come into play in my work with the medicine. But I laid there and I had a full on psychedelic vision. It's absolutely the real deal. And it lasted a good long time. And I had a real healing that was purposeful to me. I've shared it a lot. I could share it again, but it's already out there a lot. But I will say this, it was what I needed at the time. At 21 years old, it was about sexuality and being female and pushing past that embarrassment of talking about it and accepting my sensual self. And it was also this curiosity I had about the female sexuality, how so much of it was how I felt about the person and the mood that I was in and our connection, the connection I had. So I wondered how much of it was physical, you know, like, you know, rub this and do that, right? As opposed to the rest of it, the other. And this experience made it very clear to me that most of it for me was the other. It was the connection, it was my mindset, and it was a very, very interesting mind, body, spirit experience about sexuality. And, you know, I work with a lot of women, and so many of those women are young women, and they're going through this too. Things haven't changed as much as we think. A lot of women are saying the same kinds of things about their sexuality. We're really um, we're given very, very confusing messages in our culture. Mm-hmm. And at that time, you know, it was coming out of the 70s, which was a really wild time. It was right before the AIDS epidemic. So nobody was worried about having sex with a lot of people. I never really did. I was really kind of a one-man woman, rather. And that's always how I've been. But which is probably a good thing because many of the people I knew died.
Yeah.
Many men who were in my life were gay, and they did not know anything about AIDS until it was too late. And they were very close friends and colleagues. So it was a very strange time. But after that point, I definitely was working with cannabis. And maybe because I had that experience with it for the first time, I had no interest in taking it as a party drug. I didn't have any interest in using it to close off or hide from things. I was the opposite. I was like, this is intense. This is showing me things about myself I didn't have access to. And I thought I had access to everything because I'm a truth seeker. I like to look internally and try to figure things out. That's my nature. And I always want to know myself better, you know, and grow as a person. So this helped me realize that there are things that we don't allow ourselves to see, that this glorious plant can help us to see.
Yeah, so it's a gateway drug in a really good way.
It was definitely a gateway drug for me.
Yeah, and you know I've heard and even had somewhat similar experiences myself, but I've certainly heard lots of people describe vaguely similar kinds of experience. I mean, it's an amazing plant that way, and we could spend a whole hour talking about that. But I also
absolutely
would like to, if you don't mind, move us a little closer to the present because we're already almost halfway through the hour.
Oh my gosh.
And
well, I think it's interesting too because we're talking about the talking circles, which are cannabis related. So I ended up at cannabis. I mean, you know. So we'll get to that, but just I'm glad I shared that because in the end, that's my planet.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah. So, you know, when you told that story about when you were 21 and you had the full-on psychedelic experience with that plant, I was flashing on it sounded, and you know, and it was related to your sexuality and relationships and all that, and it sounded to me like that almost could have been the seed that got planted in you that led to your current work and psychedelic feminism and cosmic sister. And I really want people to know, I know you've talked about it elsewhere, but I do want people to know more about, you know, why psychedelic feminism and what you've been doing actually with cosmic sister. And one of the questions, don't let me forget to ask this one because I know it's important to you. We both know that some men become offended about this. They think it's an attack on men and they get defensive, and that's their problem on one level. But also we want, as it said in your intro, we want to bring on board with this recognition, this understanding, anyone who's sincere and open and wants to learn. So one of my questions is going to be, if you want to address it now or later is fine with me, but is going to be, how do you communicate this, and what is the sort of essential philosophy underpinning all this that makes it clear that this is not about women blaming men or women against men or anything like that. It's about bringing us all into the light, right?
It definitely is. And I often these days with Black Lives Matter having such a big second wave, I mean, it really had a first wave at least. And that's just Black Lives Matter. That's not anti-racism. That's been around since I was a little girl. I remember, and before I was born, you know, there's always been a fight for against racism. So I use that because it's very similar to saying, if someone says Black Lives Matter and you say all lives matter, of course all lives matter, but we're focusing on Black lives. Black lives is the issue here because they need our attention. So with feminism, it's similar. It's like, of course, all people matter. Of course, everybody's pain, everybody's suffering, everybody's life journey and joy, everybody's life matters. And females are still, you know, living in an oppressed state in the world, at all of the world, all over the world. Okay, it's still male supremacy, and that's a really rotten term, and people don't like it, but it's a better term than patriarchy, because if you have patriarchy and extended patriarchy, then that is male supremacy. It's the same thing. It has been around for millennia, and it's permeated the entire planet. There might be little teeny pockets where there was something more balanced or even matriarchy. And, I also make sure to always say that I don't believe in matriarchy over patriarchy, because I really feel it would just be an alternative situation, an alternate universe, as it were, where women probably would become corrupt and power hungry as well.
Yeah. Well, if I
So,
can interrupt for a sec,
yeah,
I prefer the term, or I like the term, matrilineal, because there's
yes.
a, my old Buddhist teacher, Chogyam Trungpa, talked about natural hierarchy, that when you get your agenda and your ego out of the way, things naturally take their place, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And Native Americans have often talked about, the ones that still remember the old ways, about how their culture was matrilineal for a reason, and that's been the case in a number of places. It's obvious. It's sort of it's natural. It's a no-brainer in a sense that the lineage would run through the woman. She's the blood. She's the connection,
Mm-hmm.
etc.,
Mm-hmm.
etc., etc. Right?
Well, that
So,
also had to do with not really being sure who the father was sometimes, too.
well,
I
there
think
was
that's
that.
part
Have
of
you
it.
ever read about? I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Catalhoyuk. Do you remember the book by Ryan Eisler, The Chalice and the Blade?
Yes, yes.
She says that when they dug up this place in the Middle East somewhere, a really large archaeological dig, and they found the foundations and the base of all the rooms in the whole city, and it became very obvious to them that that the woman's room was the biggest room in every house, and the conclusion that people like her came up with was that you didn't have to have monogamy. The woman was the
Mm-hmm.
link to the child, and so
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
matrilineal in that sense, right? You know.
Well, yes, and there's interesting science with the genetics too. But I still say,
Hmm.
and in my heritage on my Greek side, the indigenous Greeks were also possibly matriarchal, but certainly what we have been able to uncover from the ruins, which is quite a bit. The medicine women, they were women.
Hmm.
I mean, they were all
That's a
women.
biggie.
They
Oh
were
yeah.
all women, and then it became more patriarchal as it moved on.
Hmm.
And it's a clear distinction. It's very clear. And then when the Romans took over, it was totally patriarchal by that point. I mean,
Yeah.
even I like to say this because it brings this other issue up. They appropriated the religion and spirituality of the Greeks, and then they kind of destroyed it.
Hmm.
And so I try to not get upset because I know people don't realize, but it's a message I put out. If you call the love goddess Venus instead of Aphrodite, you're calling her by a name that was the appropriators and the dominators. They enslaved the Greeks. Now, the
Hmm.
Greeks were not perfect, and they certainly had slaves as well. They were not perfect, okay? And they did have patriarchy, but they had what they were trying for in the late era of Greece. They were trying for something balanced.
Hmm.
And again, it was just a religion like everything else, but I think that a lot of times with religions, it wasn't necessarily a belief system that you were supposed to truly believe every single thing was really, factual. It was also a language, a way of understanding and a way of leading people to understand their place in the world. And it was more, this is what I call the language of psyche, which is really archetypal psychology. It's usually called the language of soul, but psyche is not really, simplifying it to soul is another appropriation. It also really irks a lot of indigenous people. If you use a word and you translate it to a one word, you're really losing a lot, right?
Hmm.
But if you need to use another word from another culture, it means that your culture didn't come up with a word like that because they didn't find that particular concept to be important enough to give it a word. Then sometimes we'll use a foreign phrase, like in French or whatever, and it's because we don't have that word, but the French or whoever thought that was important enough. So the Greek psyche really, the best definition I've found is it's that which animates us.
Hmm.
It's the thing that, if you've ever seen someone die or you've ever had to put a beloved animal companion to sleep, I'm always amazed by that, because the moment that psyche leaves them, that body is just a body. And you can love the body too. Like, I've held the body and cried for the body because the sweetness of that body. But it's very clear that that the whatever that is, the psyche, that other part of that human being is somewhere else or gone. We don't know. I'm spiritual agnostic, so I don't believe I know where it is. I'm happy with exploring and coming up with ideas, but I won't just say I know where they are, where they go. But it does seem to be a very, very magical thing, and it's intriguing to me. And my work is all about the psyche. That's what it's about. So, you know, from that perspective, the language of psyche is better to me than the language of soul. It's the same thing, basically. But for me, from the psychedelic perspective, I'm delving into what all these things that I studied for so many years about archetypal psychology, especially in my ancient heritage. There are very clear ways of describing the shamanic and psychedelic experience. So I'm really, really excited about that. And it's something that I'm developing, that I'm planning to share for in-person spirit plant medicine, hopefully 2021. I'm very, very excited about it. The more I look, the more I find.
So what's going on with Cosmic Sister for people watching this who haven't a clue, who have never heard of it before? What is it? What are you doing? I know, but they don't know, or some of them don't know.
Well, most people don't realize that Cosmic Sister was originally intended to, it was really originally birthed as an underground feminist collective in the natural products industry, which is a companion industry to ours. And I hate even using the word industry for psychedelics, but unfortunately, that's what's being used now.
Well, that's another issue.
Yeah, it's another issue, another conversation, but it's a big deal. But I think I prefer to say the scene or the community or the field. You know, if you're in the field, we're in the field, right, of psychedelics. This is what we do. This is our career, if you will.
Right.
It's my primary focus. There's nothing else. This is it. So it is a field, but it's also a scene, and it's also a renaissance and a community, and all of those things are really beautiful to me. So when you call it an industry, something else, it's a different focus. I've seen that happen in other fields, and I'm sorry to see that happen to ours, but it's inevitable. That's how we are. We're capitalists. This is capitalist world right now. That's how we see it. And so in the industry of psychedelics, or rather the industry of natural products, it was much better than the norm out there, but it was still quite sexist. And the sexism held women down and back like everywhere else. And it was something that I was in for a short while, and I saw it, and I was old enough to understand what I was seeing. And I realized that I had a problem. All these wonderful women were sharing with me their experiences with the sexism and how frustrating it was because you couldn't do anything about it. And I realized that I couldn't share any of their stories because they were told in confidence, and because it was a trade show. You know, it was like a community of people who had jobs related to clients and related to selling product. And so they couldn't really come, you see what I'm saying? It's talking about the hierarchy and the problem with the imbalance right there. It's such a beautiful example of it. These are good men. Most of them are very good men. A lot of them don't even know that they were, you know, how they were affecting the women. They would have been surprised because the women weren't telling them. Because if the woman told them, they wouldn't have their job, or the person would stop, you know, supporting their NGO, or they wouldn't buy the products. So, it was, I realized very quickly that there was no there there. So I kind of moved on. And right around that time, I eloped with Chris and ran off to the Amazon and experienced ayahuasca. And I probably wouldn't have experienced ayahuasca. I obviously would never have experienced ayahuasca without Chris, but I was not planning to drink at all because of the PTSD. And I ended up doing it after a long conversation with Jeremy Narby.
Yes.
Kindred spirit, turns out to also be a stoner.
DNA and the Cosmic Serpent.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this was 2008.
Uh-huh.
It was our first anniversary.
Right. And
so
how was that first ayahuasca experience? It
was very clear that I was to do Cosmic Sister. I got a very, very clear vision. I got other things first. That was not my first vision that everyone knows if they've listened to any of my talks is, you know, I was pretty much told by a divine feminine entity who on the one hand had total confidence in me, but on the other hand was quite disappointed in me for not doing what I should do for, for allowing people in my life to have, I had gone internal.
Mm-hmm.
I'd become very introverted in my work. And she was basically saying, get the fuck out and
Mm.
do your work.
Step up.
Step up,
Yeah.
step up. You have
Yeah.
everything. Look
Yeah.
what you have. Look what I gave you. It was that kind of
Mm.
thing. I never
Mm-hmm.
saw her. For the weirdest reason, she seemed African to me.
Mm.
Very, very, very ancient
And
and
a
very
tough task
powerful.
and a tough taskmaster apparently.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. But loving. And she was right. And I
Yeah.
remember saying, I said to her, in my mind, obviously, I said to her, I hear you. You're right. I understand. I know. And I also know myself, and you know me. It's going to take me some time.
Mm.
It takes me time,
Yeah.
but
Hey, I
I'm
got a
getting.
question. Yeah, I got a question for you about the way that one has those experiences with ayahuasca. If you don't mind, it's a slight diversion to where we may be going here, but I think it might be very interesting in general. It's like people like Terence McKenna and others have said, you don't just automatically. In fact, Jeremy Narby
Mhm.
told an anecdote in that book where he said, now this isn't the same as being, the kind of personal message that seemed completely right on from that you just described with this feminine African power woman. But just in sort of vaguely the same category, you might say, Narby told a story about how I think it's a long time since I read it, but I think it was maybe his first ayahuasca experience. He was down in Colombia or
Mhm.
someplace, and he was doing it with the shaman, the ayahuasquero, and he had these visions of reptilian beings,
Yes.
and they told him, we rule the universe. So he told this to the ayahuasquero in the morning. He said, I had this vision, where these guys said, we're the rulers of the universe. And if I remember it correctly, people who've read the book more recently might know the story better. But basically the ayahuasquero just kind of rolled his eyes and said, they always say that, right? So, so in other words,
That's very
as
funny.
Terence McKenna had said, has also said, you don't just automatically assume that because, you're having this visionary experience that whoever is communicating to you is authentic or a wise soul or whatever. Have you ever
Yes.
sensed that? Like, how do you discriminate or anything like that?
I've never had that experience personally, but I do have a pretty good sense of what's fantasy and what isn't, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
okay with that. To me, it goes back to my, being a spiritual agnostic. Um, I see it a little bit like watching a really great movie. Okay, you agree to suspend disbelief, and
Mm-hmm.
it's okay. Like we just watched the series BBC production of The Musketeers. It was a blast. It was a blast, but you totally suspend disbelief the whole time, and you come out the other side of it not changed. Like you're not thinking you're a musketeer or whatever. You're fine. You're back to normal. It doesn't change you in some weird way. So I feel like if you go into these wild ceremonies with ayahuasca or whatever, you're not, and you really truly are able to suspend disbelief and just say, I am there. I'm going to surrender to this
Mm,
moment. When I come out the
good.
other side, I've never had the problem of being stuck in a delusion, but others do. And I
Yeah.
don't know what that difference is. I have
Mm-hmm.
seen it a lot. I think a lot of it has to do with who you're with, the
Mm,
community you're journeying with, and how you're led, especially after in
yeah.
integration. Because I think that people can get manic as well.
Yeah.
They can get stuck in a heightened reality that doesn't go away. That's really far out, and it's not all bad. It's just that if you
Mm-hmm.
don't have community around you to help you kind of integrate that into your life, then it's
Yeah.
not necessarily a great thing. You
No,
know?
absolutely. Well, this is why we
And,
talk so much about set and setting.
oh
But
my gosh, and
the,
integration is
yeah,
everything.
the reason
Everything.
I, yeah, sorry. The reason I brought the question up, however, was because I have heard people say things that seem questionable, like that some voice is telling them, you
Mm,
should break up with this person you're with, or that kind
right.
of thing, like, so, you know, I think sometimes it's just what I think Carl Jung called externalized projections of the ego, you know?
Yeah, I think it's all of
Yeah.
the above. And I
Uh-huh.
think that, I think that if the ayahuasca tells you you should break up with someone, you should listen to that. That doesn't mean you
Hmm.
need to break up with them, but it does mean you need to listen to that. You're
Okay.
feeling like breaking up with someone.
Good
That
point.
is real information.
Mm.
But, we brought a wonderful woman down last time who had been with someone for a very long time. And
Mm-hmm.
she really got the message that it was over. And
Mm.
I encouraged her to, instead of ending it, to use her, take some time with her integration and instead channel that energy from the ayahuasca into really talking with her husband of many years and helping him to understand how she felt.
Hmm. That's a
And
really interesting.
she did that, and the marriage is, she says, is better than ever.
That's a really interesting perspective on that. Yeah, not just ignoring those things. Yeah,
Mm-hmm,
that's
mm-hmm.
great. Yeah. So, what
But I,
are you doing with Cosmic Sister?
sorry, and I do want to go back to the men thing because that's really important.
Oh,
Uh,
that too. Yeah, yeah.
Cosmic Sister in psychedelics started as these grants. Okay, the first thing was I was kind of bummed that I didn't end up with the millions of dollars I made in technology and high tech because my ex took it all,
Hmm.
and so I didn't have the money I wished I'd had to do all these good things in the world with, and I decided I'd just do what I could. So I'd had such a big healing experience with ayahuasca. I'd been in several times with Chris before I started the grants. I just decided that there was a young woman, Rachel Carlevale, actually. You know who Rachel is.
I do.
I I witnessed her do something so selfless and meaningful. She really saved someone in her family's life. And I was very impressed with that. And I also knew from my own experience with sisters that sometimes you really need you're gonna you need your own healing from that experience. Like that experience of saving somebody or helping them to save themselves can also be traumatic. And I just said, you know what? I'm going to pay your way down to ayahuasca to try ayahuasca, and we're going to work on this together because I know that if you don't do that, you're probably going to carry this for many, many years, and it's going to hold you back, And she was like,
Hmm.
yeah. So she was the first one, and it was extraordinary. And then from there I was like, yeah, I'm going to do this. And so the next year was a few women, and then there was three, and there was just, it's grown. And that was the original thing with Cosmic Sister. It was all about helping women to have a really extraordinary ayahuasca experience with Shipibo people, and with at some of the really great places in Peru. So you're at a place where it's as close to traditional as you're going to get, and a really, really great, done right and safely. And it's been wonderful. And that is truly work that I love. I mean, if I could do that and that alone, I would.
Hmm.
It's not great for everyone, but it's great for almost everyone. And it's just, I don't know what to say. It's a privilege, really, for me to be able to be part of that in their life. I'm very humbled by it, and I don't do the healing. I just bring them to a place where they can heal themselves and help them to
Hmm.
understand the ayahuasca and how to work with it. And I do select women who typically are very keen to be part of that and have a knack for the medicine.
Hmm.
Chiyoma's going to be part of the speaking this next. She's a
Correct.
presenter
Yeah.
for this next one. She came down with us last time. Wow. I mean, she's a medicine woman for real. Like
Mm.
she's extraordinary. So I
Mm.
really love that work. But then I also, being married to Chris, I ended up at a lot of psychedelic conferences, and I was really kind of horrified, shocked at how few men were up on that stage. So
Women, you mean? How few women?
yeah, sorry, sorry, I had
Yeah.
that totally right. How many men there were and how few women.
Right. Now that
Um,
I've interrupted, I just want to
yeah,
make a reference to Chioma, please, because
yes,
she is going to be one of the people speaking at our. So if you're listening to this, hopefully you will watch or hear this before the conference, but it's all relevant afterwards as well because these women that Zoe is bringing into our conference are going to be around for a long time and they're
oh
going to
yeah.
become increasingly more prominent, which is quite wonderful. But Chioma will be at this year's, which is October 23rd, 4th, and 5th of 2020.
And she's a
And
rock star. She
Yes,
really is.
I've met her on Zoom. She's lovely,
Yes.
and so before we end, we got a lot of time left. I'd say another 15 minutes or so. But before we finish, I want to make sure that you say a little bit about some of the women that are going to be coming to the conference this year, because
Sure.
it's not time limited. If somebody watches this after the conference, they'll still get to hear about these people who, as I said, are likely to be more and more well known as time goes by.
But the problem with that is I can't get to everybody. And then I usually say I don't like to
Oh,
talk
right.
about women because of that, because they're all so amazing. And there are
Uh-huh.
thousands of women in Cosmic Sister now, and they are psychedelic feminists,
You're the
which is
perfect
so
parent.
cool. And they're also at least 25% men, and that's consistent. More
Mm.
men are interested in Cosmic Sister, and I love that. I
Yeah, that's great.
love that because we're all in relationship with each other. And what a world it would be if it was only women. That would be a very sad world.
Wouldn't be much
So,
fun.
yeah, with that in mind, I mean, all of these women are great. The ones that have, again, like I'm going through the list. There's, I can't do that in 15 minutes.
Oh, no
Maybe
worries.
that's the
Yeah,
second one we do.
I know. You're the perfect parent. You want to be fair to all your children.
Well, they're not my children, but they're my sisters.
Yeah, I understand.
And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mentioned the others because it came up in story. Chioma's Nigerian originally,
Hmm.
and she
Yeah.
came over because of the civil war there. So she carries some really difficult stuff.
Mhm. So, well,
Um,
let me ask you this more general question then. One of the things that I really respect about the work that you're doing, Zoe, and have been doing, is that you're very passionate. I think we could use that word, committed, you could say, to
mhm.
about ethnic and cultural diversity, and not only
Yes,
bringing women into the fold, so to speak, in the psychedelic world, but bringing people of what you might call color or
hmm
non-white European-based people. Can you talk a little bit about that?
well, yes, but I will say that even with European people and so-called white people, there's a great deal of diversity as well. So for me, it's about
Hmm,
cultural diversity rather than skin tone. But I do think that given the
good.
situation of white supremacy, that's another horrible term, but it's also the basis of our nations, Canada and the United States, and many others, unfortunately. The Black and Indigenous and women of color is the term I like to use, and people of colors. It doesn't just have to be women, but for me with Cosmic Sister, I say Black, Indigenous, and women of color. That's the group I'm talking about. So yes, I've
Hmm.
worked very hard to find people from that group, as well as quote unquote white women who are also very cool and very diverse. And yeah, it's I think that one of the things that excites me about the human species is how creative we are. And these spiritual traditions are all very worthy of our attention, and they're rich. They're rich things. I mean, you think about Shuni bringing all that information from the Mayan cosmology that she's expert in that. I can't wait to see what she has to say. I find her descriptions of time from the Mayan cosmology fascinating. I'd say, like, I don't know Rocio, but she is very close with Rosemary Gladstar, who is somebody who has been basically I don't know even how to put her. She's a legendary herbalist, and
Hmm.
she also has dedicated her life to supporting women in herbalism.
Hmm.
So there's a huge, vibrant community of women herbalists, and that's a large category because that's also ethnobotany, and now lots and lots of plant medicine, like sacred plant women, also in that group. So if Rocio is Rosemary's shaman, that is impressive.
And
And I don't
Rocio,
know her, but I know
yeah.
she'll be extraordinary.
And you're speaking of again the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference where
Mm-hmm.
Her name is Rocio Alarcon will be speaking, and the other woman you mentioned, Nan Shuni Giron from Guatemala. Rocio is from Ecuador, and again, this
Exactly.
is one of the things that's so wonderful about having not being able to do our live conference and being forced to go online is that we now it makes sense to bring in people from Ecuador and Guatemala in this
Right.
version. So it's exciting. Yeah.
And we don't, we're doing what I said, what I didn't want to do. Like I hope Manelli is part of this. She's originally from the UK, but she's in
Mm-hmm.
LA now, and she's been really important in the LA scene with the yoga and cannabis as a
Yeah.
Black woman. She has been all about, she told me that, when she was first going to these fancy yoga studios in LA, it was like there was nobody like me in the studio, she said. And
Mm-hmm.
that's not right. Yoga is not just for skinny white girls.
Hmm.
So she started her own studio, and she's really wonderful. And we can't not mention the Duchess. The dank Duchess is, she's another rock star, and she is just—I don't even know where to start with Duchess, but she's also originally from Panama.
Mm.
So it's
Mm.
more diversity as well.
No, no
And
kidding.
yes, she's a hash queen, but she's also very, very into psilocybin mushrooms. And I love how excited she is to be introduced to the psychedelic scene, because that's all she needed. She
Mm-hmm.
just needed an invitation, and she is there now. I suspect she'll be a keynote speaker not too long from now. She will be somebody everybody wants at their
Mm-hmm.
conference. And I think that Danielle is amazing, and
Danielle
from that,
Negrin.
yes, from that perspective of diversity, okay,
Yeah.
sure, she's a white girl, all right, whatever that really means. I don't see people that way as the truth, but I also recognize that
Good.
racism does, the effects of racism are real, but my opinion is race is a construct. So whoever she is, Danielle has her own story to tell, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a unique story. It's diverse in the sense of how she came to work with psychedelics, and she also runs the San Francisco Psychedelic Society, which is extremely diverse, and she is part of why that is so. She's doing a beautiful, beautiful job. If you're ever looking for diversity, check out her Instagram page. She has been really supportive, so she's fantastic. And who are we missing?
So hang on a
Everyone
sec. That's
has lived.
Danielle Negrin, spelled Negrin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's several more. There's Tiana Mirapai.
Anna, oh my gosh, and Rachel, both are Jewish priestesses, basically. They're both very different, but they have that in common. And it's really cool because they're expert in it, and they know a lot of goddess information from mostly very patriarchal religion and
Mm-hmm.
spirituality. They're going back from the early Hebrew spiritualities that were not patriarchal. So they're expert in that. Both of them very different. Tiana is an elder, and she calls herself a Jewwitch, which I happen to love. And she holds ceremonies, and she also helps people find themselves. She trains a lot of young women, and women who the way she describes it is women who just have so much power, they just don't know what to do with it. And whatever
Mm-hmm.
that power is. And they come to her, and she helps them to understand their goddess self and to express it. And she's very loving, and her work, I've witnessed these young women over 13 years. I've witnessed them transform in her care, and in all the right ways. She's a psychotherapist by trade, so she's got all that as well. That's her day job.
Right.
But the Sophia School is really about herbalism and ancient female ways, not just female, but and she teaches it.
Mm-hmm.
And then Rachel is more of a slam poet.
Rachel Kahn.
Yeah, she gets up there and she speaks it, and
She's
it's
great.
fabulous.
Oh
She's
yeah.
just a dynamo. So I mean, I can't wait. You can't not watch her when she's on the stage. You
Yeah.
know. So I know there are others. Who else is on that
Oh,
list?
there's Dr. Sita.
Oh my gosh, Dr. Sita, another goddess. See, this is the part that I love. Like, all of these women are just great. If they weren't great, I wouldn't bring them to you.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Sita is she's an Ayurvedic doctor in LA. She's Indian American. She's gorgeous. And she's just extremely bright and loving. And she's not just an Ayurvedic doctor. She's also has focuses on cannabis and other sacred plants. And she is, what was I going to say about Sita? She's also a love specialist, like sexuality. Now, the sexuality theme comes up a lot with Cosmic Sisters because of what I had mentioned with my original
Mm-hmm.
Cannabis. I mean, women are given this, in our culture, we're given this really messed up idea of our sexualities. It's just so many mixed messages, and the movies make it worse. You know, you
Mm-hmm.
can either be a virgin, or you can be a whore, or you could be a mother, or you could be a wife, or you could be, but you can't be all of the things that you are. You can't be your complex self. You know, it's very messed up. So many women are working with plants to explore those unhealthy programmings and free themselves from those, because you know we're sensual beings. That's a good thing, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
part of the life force. So she's
Beautiful.
expert in all those things. I can't wait to see what she shares.
Then there's Solana Booth.
Oh yeah. Now Solana came through another woman who I met on through Cosmic Sister, and she, I think what excites me about Solana that I know is that she's expert in these creation myths. She's an Indigenous woman, Indigenous American, and she's a beautiful storyteller. She's also very into mothers' rights. I found when I was researching her work, I don't know her personally, not yet, and her work was also about being able to breastfeed in public, you know, as a right, because that's an absurd thing about our culture that we have these issues around that. So she's really fantastic. I mean, she's definitely all of the psychedelic feminist stuff. She's interested in nature-based spirituality. She's interested in women's empowerment and healing. She's interested in you know, sacred plants. I mean, that's all the stuff right there. I can't wait to hear what she says.
Wonderful.
I do
It,
hope she shares some creation myths because I love them, and she is an
uh-huh.
outstanding storyteller.
Yeah, she's great too.
Mm-hmm.
Is I brought Heather Hargraves in, but are you
Yes,
putting her under the umbrella of Cosmic Sister? I forgot.
absolutely. All of
Okay.
the women are under the umbrella, and
Okay.
she came through anyway because she was part of a science panel, I think, Women in Science panel from MAPS Canada.
That's
And
where I met her. Yeah.
yeah, and I helped to promote that because I have a lot of friends
Hmm.
with MAPS Canada.
Yeah.
And she just really just stood out. What a great personality and wonderful, wonderful sense of humor. Very funny. Check out her Instagram page. It's a hoot. But
Yeah,
she's
that's
also very, very bright, and I like her sense of humor. I think sense of humor is important in medicine work because
of
if you don't
course.
have it, you're not going to make it.
You remember Wavy Gravy from back when?
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
well, after being the kind of the hippie nonpareil, at Woodstock and stuff like that, and getting famous for having the hog farm and feeding all these people, one of the things he later did was he became a spokesperson for SEVA, the organization that
mm-hmm.
was a charitable organization for dealing with eye diseases and whatnot in poor countries around the world,
Yeah.
and he noticed that a lot of these people doing this work were taking themselves too seriously, I guess you could say. So at one of their he was like the keynote speaker at a convention, is the way I heard this story. And he looked out at the audience and he said, folks, if you can't laugh about it, it's just not funny.
Yeah, that's it. That's
Yeah.
it. But you know, a lot of people come to me for advice on what to bring into the Maloka. You
Mm-hmm.
know, in the Amazon, humor is one of the essentials.
Mm. Interesting.
Humility, creativity, courage, lots of things. But without humor,
Yeah.
you know, and people are so they hold the medicine in such, you know, it's like such high esteem, you know, it's just reverence, which is appropriate, but you know, life is funny and you have to be able to laugh at yourself, and or with yourself is probably better. I mean, some
Yeah.
things you never laugh at. They're just not,
No, of
it's
course.
inappropriate to laugh at certain things.
But
But
this
there's
is
certain
connected
things
to,
that are really
yeah.
funny. I
Yeah.
mean, you
Yeah.
know,
And
I
when,
laugh
and
all the time. I laugh about my own follies.
it's great, yes, and this is related to joy as well, of course, because it's what my old Buddhist teacher called a primordial smile. It's like the creators, they're happy, the ones that are, like the ultimate creators of things, it's love. It comes from love, and
Yes.
that makes you happy.
Joy.
That makes you feel joy. And the same teacher actually, in terms of what you were just saying, that you can't avoid, that the fact that there's a lot of suffering, of course. But so he
Hmm.
said that the kind of the awakened mind is a mind of joy and sadness mixed together, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, because that's the two flip sides of the coin, isn't it?
Hmm.
It's like tragedy and comedy,
Yeah.
but
Beautiful.
laughter is the best medicine. Truly,
Mm,
it is.
nice.
So it's good to go in there with the humor. And I also would say if Pam is still on the roster, I don't know
She
Pam very
is.
well.
Pam Crisco.
But
Yeah. She is.
I do know Paul, and Paul has also he has sponsored us quite generously, which I
Nice.
really appreciate. And he did that after he saw some of the women up there doing their stuff, like
Mm,
sharing their expertise and their love with the audience and perspectives, which is really what the diversity is about. It's
yeah.
like different perspectives.
Yes.
That's not, it's not just about they're female, it's about these are different perspectives. And
Hmm.
it's more interesting to, not hear the same thing over and over and over again. It's more of a celebration of our humanity because we're really
Absolutely. Yeah.
creative beings. But I
Yeah.
think Paul is such an extraordinary man, and if this is the woman that he's with, because this is his sweetheart, she has to be extraordinary.
Oh, she'll be good. I've met her, and she's going to
Yeah.
be talking about microdosing with psilocybin, which is a big issue these
Yes,
days.
yes,
Yeah.
and she's a medical doctor too.
She is an MD, yes.
Yes.
So, obviously not, well, it's obvious to you and I, and probably to people watching or listening to this by now that we could go on with some fascinating subjects for another hour or two. But
Easily.
it's already been over an hour. And so I'm wondering if I could toss this question at you. It's a kind of a challenging one, and if you don't like it, you could just say, no, let's end it on the notion of laughter.
Okay.
But I just want to say that it's obvious that you believe in humanity. You are a
Hmm.
very positive person.
Hmm.
But how do you have a take on or a sense of how do I put this? How optimistic are you that the best is going to come out of us and out of this period of time where things are so difficult and going through transition, and that we as a species are going to be able to get ourselves to straighten up and fly right in the future? How confident are you that we're going to be able to go through this transition and create the kind of world that people like you and I and millions of others actually have envisioned and felt as a possibility for humanity?
I'm always optimistic.
Great.
I think that without hope, you have only despair.
Beautiful.
And if you don't hope, why bother?
Mm,
And I'm going to fight to the end for
excellent.
good, fight for the good in the world. And I'm not alone.
Hmm.
So whether or not we make it, um, I mean, it doesn't look good, Stephen. But I do see when we went way back to the beginning with my sweetheart from college and others along the way, really good men I was with for periods of time of my life and loved very deeply,
Hmm.
and other people who I ran into had carried trauma that they could not seem to work on.
Hmm.
And until I discovered how psychedelics can help you with those traumas that you can't get to because they're too damn painful or you're unaware of them or whatever it is, and you actually can have a wonderful life and you can move past that thing that's holding you back sometimes for years and years, and it expresses itself in all sorts of ways, addictions, depression, abusive personalities. Hurt people, it's true. Okay, and hurt people hurt nature. So it's all about consciousness. It's about us becoming better apex. We're apex predators on this planet. That's the given. I
Yeah.
mean, right now we got this pandemic, so you could argue that a virus is also a kind of an apex predator because they haven't wiped us out yet. Right now, we are the
Mm,
apex predator, whether we like it or not,
yeah.
and that is a responsibility because when you have that kind of power, it corrupts, and it has corrupted us as a species. Not
Hmm.
necessarily you, not necessarily me, people who
Yeah.
are listening as individuals. It's not our fault. It's
Yeah.
our fault as a species, though. We have to see ourselves in that collective in this world because that's what it's come to.
Yeah.
There's almost 8 billion of us. And yes, this pandemic is going to take us down a little bit, but that's not the way to do it.
No. Yeah.
That's not, some people are like, oh, it'll help the population. You know what? That's not cool. It's too random. That is not how to do it. We can do this in an intelligent way. And we do need to tackle that problem. It's in the top 5 environmental issues is the issue of population. But there are also other issues people don't wish to look at.
Yeah.
Like the connection between some of the dominator religions and the world powers, for example.
Yeah.
People don't like to look at that and the connection of that to environmental damage because it's very connected. So we have to look at it like this. We have right now as a species, we have a narcissism disorder that's extreme. We think we're the most important things on the planet. We tend to forget that there's anything else. I mean, again, it's not you, it's not me. I live for nature. I love nature. I'm fascinated by nature. And I've devoted my life to it. I mean, when we talk about Cosmic Sister and psychedelic feminism, the heart to me is nature, and our responsibility and how we can rise to the occasion and be the best humans we can be and better citizens of Gaia. That's really it.
Beautiful.
We are living on this complex, beautiful, ecosystem that's just so extraordinary. And yes, I do love humanity. I believe in us. I am an artist. I have seen what we are capable of. It's the art. It's one of the best expressions we have. So is science. I mean, look at what we do. Look at what we make. We're amazing. We have potential, but we are so screwed up right now as a species.
Yeah,
we
nice.
have it all backwards, and it's partly that narcissism. And if people could just start thinking about us a little bit more as a species, as like we separate ourselves. That's another thing that we do. We tend to sort of think we don't think we're different. We think we're different from animals. We say humans and animals, but we're animals.
Yeah, I'd say that's
else.
yeah, I'd say that's kind of the central problem that we got disconnected from our true nature. But you know what? You've just said some really beautiful and powerful things, and I think that would be a great place to leave it if you don't mind, because clearly there's no natural place to stop, because we could go on all evening and into tomorrow. Order in for pizza and just keep going. So
I have one more thing to say.
Oh,
I think it's really important to bring up the male thing, because you asked me earlier on, and I don't feel like I really properly said it's actually a perfect time, because when we talk about apex predators and how power corrupts with humans, it's the same for men in a patriarchy. And it's very hard for a lot of men to see their privilege. And it is a privilege, because if an entire gender is oppressed by another, the person who isn't repressed is not going to have that experience. They're not going to know the subtleties of how it is for us. So just the way we as humans have a responsibility to help the planet, I think men have a responsibility to step up to the plate for women. This is not a women's issue. This is a human issue. This is a human rights issue. And we are all very, very much in dynamic together. You can't separate from females and males and females. We're all integrated. We can't like self-segregate. Well, we can, but what fun would that be anyway? So the other thing is this. The same patriarchy and the same corrupt, antiquated system that hurts us women hurts men too.
Absolutely.
And that is absolutely where my work has brought me today. And that was also my most recent ceremony, for ayahuasca rather. It was a big ayahuasca ceremony that made it very clear to me that that was the next step. And the men are responding, and they're so fabulous. And I'm learning so much from the men. Like I asked them what their patriarchal wounds are. And like, they're classic. I mean, you couldn't write the script any better if you wanted to. It's almost surreal to me, because it's like all the classic stuff. And they're suffering from it, whether they know it or not. And as soon as they express it, it's like, yeah, that's a big deal for me. And I think if the more we share together in talking circles or wherever, in safe spaces, which is what TEMENO means. It means sacred space. It's an indigenous Greek word. The more we're able to really share those kinds of pains that we have that are specific to this patriarchal reign on the planet that is also destroying the environment, the more we can do that with each other and witness each other's pains and struggles, I think it's really very, very powerful as a healing
Excellent. Yeah.
a healing experience. So I really encourage people to explore that, and more. You know, we need more male allies. We need you guys. It's like, I mean, again, Black Lives Matter. Same thing. It's like we can't do all this ourselves. We will do a lot. We are strong, but we need everybody to help us, and that's the same for women. You know,
Yeah.
we're not quitting, because we don't want to see the next women, the next females growing up having the same stuff we had. We just can't stand to see them and know what's coming. And we
Yeah.
can't stand that so little has changed for the women, for the females of today. It's horrifying how little has changed. We need your help.
Okay, there's a call to action. So, well, okay, we didn't end on quite the high note that you had nailed about 5 minutes
But
ago,
it
but
is high.
they heard that the call
It's
to
high,
action.
Stephen. It's
Yeah.
very high.
Okay, fine then. Fine. I won't argue with you. Yeah, but anyway, you've certainly said a lot of remarkable things today that I think would be very beneficial to people. So I hope lots of people see this or listen to it. And so I want to wrap things up at this point. And by doing so, or in doing so, I want to mention, first of all, again, the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference, which, if you happen to catch this before October 23rd, 4th, and 5th, is on that weekend. And Zoe will be one of the featured speakers, and she, through Cosmic Sister, is also responsible for bringing most of the women, if not all of the women, who are speaking at the
Real.
conference. So that's going to be a remarkable event. And as I mentioned at the beginning, there's a discount code of 11% that you can use, which is VSPMC, Virtual Spirit Plant Medicine Conference 2020. And yeah, so go check that out at the www.
Dalida.
What's that?
We didn't mention Jalida. Jaja.
Jalida, yes, she is a musician, and she will be part of that. And of course, Theta Phoenix will be a big part of
Yes.
it as well. Wonderful sound creator, and so on and so on. Beautiful voice, etc., etc. Yeah. Oh, there was others we didn't mention. We didn't
Oh
mention
yeah.
some of the couples, but
Right.
I think people understand. We don't have to cover every single person. There's like 24 people,
It's gonna be quite a lineup, and it's not even
uh,
really completely done. There's those
not
two little
quite.
spots we're working on, you know.
You and
So
I are working on that. Yeah.
yeah, we are.
Okay, so again, I told you that I wanted you to mention any links of any kind that people can check out.
It's all Cosmic Sister. I've made it very easy. You know,
Uh-huh.
at Cosmic Sister, you'll just write in Cosmic Sister in Google, you'll find everything.
Perfect.
If you
Yeah.
look at Psychedelic Feminism, you'll find a lot more.
Ec-
You know, Cosmic Sister will bring you to where you can find everything, either on
Wonderful. Yeah.
Instagram or the website. It could use an update. That's something we're going to need to raise money for, but it's all there. You can find everything from that. We're most active on Instagram right now, but we're also
Okay.
active on Facebook. You know, Facebook is one of those places that, depending on your generation, a lot of times.
Hmm.
You know, people aren't using it as much as they're using Instagram. And I like Instagram. It's very interactive. So
Yeah.
that's where we are at the moment.
Okay, cool. Right. So again, really appreciate it. Honestly, it's you're just fascinating. You've got so much information and you articulate it so eloquently, and it's so positive. It's all about us waking up and healing. So I want to thank you again, and I also want to ask you to stick around for a couple of minutes after we turn off the record button here, just so that we
Okay.
can, have a casual chat for a couple of minutes, if you will.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.